Hello and welcome back to the Godot community. My name is Sahira Dean. I'm the virtual PLC lead for high school 2D art. In today's webinar, I wanted to show some of the steps involved in doing a project I did this year with my students, hand narratives, and they of course used ink. I hope you were able to see the first webinar where I went over the mini lab or part of the mini labs that they do in starting this project. So if you didn't take a look at that, please go back and get some tips that I shared in that video. I'm going to go ahead and switch my screen. All right, so the first thing I do is show students some examples of some other student successes, other artist successes, of things, essentially that I found online. I did this project once before, but it was quite some time ago or a few years ago. I showed them those examples too, but I want to just show you kind of what I, show them. So in doing this, I do discuss, just kind of how to build a narrative or how to build a story using a picture, right? So we'll look at some examples. We'll talk about, what is this one saying? How do they use lighting? And of course, these are all done in graphite and charcoal, right? I think there might be one in ink, but it's more so the narrative that I want them to kind of pay attention to. What particular story can you learn about the hands, the positioning, the cropping? What kind of props might they want to use? I had some students that did this particular pose in their photographs, but as opposed to kind of taking the simple route, I'd encourage some of them to push it a little bit more, like what kind of symbol might you want to put in your hand? What might you be holding? Of course, the famous, Escher image there, right? So all about, just kind of getting them to look and hopefully think before they just go taking pictures, okay? So I set up a area in the back of my room with a curtain and some lights, actually two areas. One was in my closet where they could kind of control the lighting a little bit more. One in the back of the room with just a white sheet or white piece of fabric. But I definitely did have some spotlights. So I just wanted to show you some of the pictures they were able to get. Okay, some of the narrative is a little bit better than some of the others. Okay, and then we talked about editing the photographs, so once you get the picture, of course, is it going to be in color? Turn it to black and white. What do you need to crop out? Might you need to reshoot? All information that's in the photograph, they do understand that needs to be in their final work. So anything random like this right here, if they leave it in accidentally, not being aware of what's in there, then they're responsible for doing that in the picture, right? This lot of wood grain. She complained a little bit about doing this, but it turned out pretty good, for the actual photograph. Gang signs might come up. He told me about the meaning for this, right, which I can't remember right now what it was. But it was a believable story. But if you get any random, signs that you're not sure of the meaning of, definitely do your research there to make sure, you're not promoting anything crazy. Okay, but this student actually does nails, right? So she wanted to kind of feature, the nails that she did, right? So lots of different images, for the particular project. But their goal, of course, was to build a narrative. She actually took a picture here with her favorite pair of headphones, right? So that's something that she always has. That's what she wanted to feature in her particular work. Okay, so while they're taking pictures, before they start taking pictures, and I'll introduce the next mini lab that they can do while they're waiting to take their pictures at the session. Some students do choose to take their pictures at home, and that's totally fine. But I do give them a deadline as far as, like if they go home and forget. So I'll give them a deadline to take the picture. Otherwise, they'll have to use, what they took in class. But everybody has to take a picture in class just to make sure everybody has something. So while they're doing the picture, this is the mini lab that they'll be working on. And they do need to partner up sometimes to use the lighting and all that kind of stuff. So we'll do practice doing blind contour hands and modified contour hands. So of course, blind contour means you're not looking at the paper. Modified contour, of course, means you are looking. And of course, blind, you're not lifting your pen. With modified, you can kind of lift your pen and so on and so forth. So we'll do that doing hands. So, and this is my instruction to them. I always recommend students start here as opposed to the middle. And if it goes off the page, that's totally fine. And then, of course, their goal is to get as much detail as they can possibly get. Of course, timing them is a good idea, maybe starting with, 1 minute or 5 minutes, so on and so forth, right? So there's a short example of blind, and then of course modified, where you are looking at what you're drawing. You can lift your pen, so on and so forth. Your goal is still to get the detail. And then of course they'll just practice drawing their hands. One technique I like to teach them is using a mitten technique. And even though they're going to use the grid for this particular project, I feel this is still important just because it gives them some more knowledge, right, in terms of drawing still life when they don't need to use a grid or, just in general. So I'll do a small one here. So using the mitten technique, if you're not familiar, if you draw the shape of the palm of the hand, and then you'll draw the wrist, right, and then where the fingers are, and then area for the glove, for the thumb, excuse me. A lot of times students will put the thumb up here. If they draw this part here, that'll remind them that the thumb starts at the bottom, technically, of the wrist, not up here. And so from here, they'll use simple cylinders to kind of stack on top of each other, keeping in mind it gets a little bit smaller as it goes up. Then I get them to look, right, and see where the next cylinder starts as it relates to the cylinder on the index finger, what's higher, what's lower. My middle finger is taller than my other fingers on my hand, so on and so forth, right? So that does tend to help a little bit. There are other techniques too. This is the one I tend to rely on that I've noticed students have the most success with, right? So after they are done, with practicing, I'll ask them to start practicing with or experimenting with ink techniques on their sketches, which again is more practice. So looking at what's darker, what's lighter, using the line to convey the form. A lot of times, again, they're nervous in terms of where to start, right? So I tell them, of course, to keep in mind that their fingers are really just value scales, or they're like simple forms, right? So this is like a cylinder, this part of your finger. The balls of your fingers can be treated almost like that sphere. But simplifying a little bit, I found into just, the basic forms does tend to help a little bit. And of course, shading with the form, okay, keeping in mind that you're trying to be intentional about how you place your ink or your medium, okay? So they'll do the practice there, which does help when they get to the final, because again, the first thing they're going to want to do is come in and outline everything, right? So if there is an area that's lighter in the picture, sometimes you do have to take some liberties in terms of making the background a little bit darker, so that way you don't have a heavy outline separating the edge of the object from the background. You have the change in value, if that makes sense. All right, so I did want to spend some time showing you some of the student examples from this year. And this was actually the first project that we started with of the semester. So this was way back in September And I like to start with ink just because, again, I feel it's pretty forgiving and it gives them a lot of confidence at the beginning of the year. Um, so, of course, I did say, tell you that they used the grid. I printed out the photos that they submitted 5 by 7, and then they enlarged their photographs. I think the papers were 15 by 21, so they had 3-inch sections on their larger white paper and 1-inch sections, 1 by 1 inch sections on their photographs. Okay, so here is the first. Now, she has a heavy outline around the whole hand, right? So I talked to her about that. She was one that was very timid in terms of, oh, that's my style, da, da, da. So she did go in and darken some more things could have been done. Um, but, you kind of pick your battles sometimes. Um, and it's a work in progress with this student, getting her to trust herself because she felt like she was going to mess it up if she went too dark. So it's an ongoing process with this student, but her final outcome was okay. Could have been darker in a lot of areas because could she have added more? Most definitely. But I called a win for that particular student. Here's another example. Okay, the scribble. And it's really, I tell students not to get too focused on, I'm going to mess it up. You're not going to mess it up. You're not going to mess it up, right? So it's all the trusting process at the beginning. Let me just turn that one around. There we go. Okay. So again, some of the criteria, range of values, not having a heavy outline around, the whole entire picture or objects in the picture, and then trying to tell some type of narrative, right? I didn't require them to use all the different ink techniques, so if they wanted to stick with scribble, they could do that. If they wanted to stick with stipple, if they wanted to mix them up, they could do that as well. All right, so that does conclude today's webinar. I thank you so much for tuning in today. I hope you did learn a few things or maybe some tips that you can go back and share with your students. Again, my name is Sahira Dean. I hope you also join me on the Godot community for the high school 2D art community where we can interact, we can take part in discussions with teachers from around the state of Georgia. And you can also look into some of the other groups that are available for visual arts. There's a 3D art high school group as well. So again, my name is Sahira Dean. I'll see you in the next webinar. Thanks so much. Bye, guys.